Hello, and thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the recording and see the demonstration about geographically scaling Flame workflows on AWS using Hammerspace data orchestration. I'm Molly Presley, and I'm the VP of Marketing here at Hammerspace and also the host for today's recording. What you'll see today as you take the next about 30 minutes with us, you'll see an architectural build out of how do you build out the building blocks across multiple AWS regions, orchestrate the content using Hammerspace, and ultimately engage with the content with Flame as you're working on a finishing project. To help walk you through this, we don't want to share just the architectural details, but absolutely show you a real-time demo so you can see what this really looks like in the real world. So we'll be having a couple of Flame experts showing you the demonstration. Stefan Labrie, the senior product owner of the Flame family over at Autodesk, and DJ Raming, who's a visual computing solution architect at AWS, will really be working with you on how this looks on the Flame side. And then Michael Bott will be adding in details from his role as the principal systems engineer at Hammerspace on how the data orchestration ties in to make this all possible.
So I think the first thing we're going to do is hand things over to DJ and talk a little bit about what this looks like from the AWS perspective.
Yeah, obviously collaborating across multiple regions takes a little bit of infrastructure. And so to kind of go through what we put together for this demo specifically, but also give you an idea of what you can do if you're putting it together yourself. Here's the case that we've got. We've got a number of Flame artists working on the East Coast, a number of Flame artists working on the West Coast. Obviously, they can't share storage directly. One of the benefits of being able to move Flame on AWS and actually run Flame on the cloud is you can have those different artists, even if they're in different parts of the West Coast, if they're close enough to an AWS region. In this example that we're showing right here, on the East Coast is East 1, which is kind of in the middle of area of the East Coast. And then we've got a region, US West 2, which again is kind of on the middle side of the West Coast. And so if those artists are in, let's say, Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, they can all connect into that one data center. And that's what we're showing here. And conversely, on the East Coast, they could be in New York or they could be in Atlanta. And still, there's low enough latency for them to be able to connect and continue to use Flame in a way that feels like Flame, with all the responsiveness and all of the kind of feedback that you would get from a Flame and the speed that you would get from a Flame. And so once we've done that, we've got the artists, no matter where they're geographically located along that East Coast or that West Coast, connecting into Flames running on AWS, we can start to leverage Hammerspace as well. And so in this case, what we've put together for the demo is we've got one Hammerspace cluster on the East Coast, and that's getting mounted over NFS to all of those Flame nodes that are being used on the West Coast. And the same thing is true for all of the Flame users on the East Coast. So once we've got that infrastructure put together, that's kind of the simple stuff. That's the AWS infrastructure getting set up. That's when Mike Bott's going to jump in and tell us a little bit more about the Hammerspace architecture that we need.
So Hammerspace is doing data exchange across both sites using an S3 bucket. So there's a shared S3 bucket in either region that both clusters are aware of. So they're synchronizing metadata directly, replicating metadata between the systems. So there's a consistent file system view. All the hierarchy, permissions, timestamps, everything is going to be synchronized between both locations. And then data is exchanged through that shared bucket. So there'll be uploads to it and downloads from it. And those uploads and downloads can happen either on demand, where there's a sparse file system inode, basically, that the client can see. A read request or a write request on that will cause data to be instantiated locally. So we are moving data around, but each instance of the data represents the actual file. So changes to
I was just going to say that's something we're also going to see live in the demo in a couple of minutes is, we'll have a shot publish workflow and we'll show that, even though one artist can see everything, not everything is synced over until it's actually needed in the configuration that we've stood up. I wanted to add just one other thing that I think is really interesting about the diagram we're looking at here from an AWS standpoint is that none of this data is leaving the AWS cloud. And so that means all the performance and all the security benefits you've got from staying within the AWS cloud can be leveraged as well. So that means that as those two Hammerspace regions are talking to each other, those two sites are talking to each other, it's all staying within the AWS infrastructure.
It might be worth calling out also, if you don't mind jumping back for 1 second, DJ. Keeping it within AWS is fantastic with all the work that's been done there for the areas you're talking about. Would you mind talking about the HP Anywhere component to talk about how that it was working together, bring the solution to the desktop?
Yeah, actually, I can jump back and, for our remote streaming of desktops, we've got a number of different options. The one that we showed at NAB was HP Anywhere. And so we showed the ability to use what used to be called Teradici, HP Anywhere now, PCOIP, in order to be able to connect to those flames, and that's supported. This afternoon, we're also going to be showing another one that's included with AWS EC2 instances called Nice DCV. But again, whatever desktop streaming protocol makes the most sense for you, it's all supported in this workflow.
Perfect. So with the ultimate goal that you have that local high performance experience using the tools you have built up on your desktop with all the benefits of the cloud.
Yeah, and especially for something like Flame, where the primary interface is a Wacom tablet. You need to have that sensitivity. You need to have the ability for it to feel like a Flame. All these protocols support pressure sensitivity on the Wacom with a fine degree of precision as well.
Makes sense. All right, we can jump back forward. Thanks for backing up. So, Mike, would you talk just a little bit about what the Hammerspace data orchestration system is designed to do?
Sure. We'll climb up to much higher altitude than the architectural diagram. This is the missing piece here, right? The solutions that we talked about are remote desktop technology to cover kind of that last mile between the user and the cloud. We've got cloud workstations running Flame, so the application, but those are distributed, and you need something that can tie those together. And the traditional approach has been, let's transfer the data, but Hammerspace gives you the ability to raise the abstraction layer of data transfer so that it is a property of the file system. So we provide a true global file system that is one file system that can span multiple locations, and we don't have to copy data everywhere. Hammerspace doesn't force you to create entire copies of the whole data set everywhere. You basically have a continuum that on one side is a sparse file system that gets populated on demand. On the other end of that continuum is everything is replicated all the time. And you can pick either end of that spectrum or any point in between that's appropriate for your workflow. In this case, we have some policies in place that cause clips, open clip files, and EXRs to be transferred. And then we have the ability to set metadata that can cause other directories to be transferred in entirety. So that allows us to manage a pipeline and make declarations about where data needs to be under what conditions. So for a situation like this, when we know rendered EXRs are going to need to be available on the other coast, we can just declare it in the file system that that's what needs to happen, and Hammerspace will take care of the data transfer for you. When changes happen, the updates get transferred to the other side. So the idea here is that this orchestration system eliminates data gravity. You aren't forced into having a complete copy of your petabyte library or your 100 terabyte project everywhere. You can only transfer what is needed to support whoever is working on it at that time in that site. And it's at a file granular level. Like I say, it doesn't need to be an entire share or an entire directory. You can very selectively, by file extension, by path component, decide what needs to be transferred to either side. And we can use that metadata that I mentioned to integrate with third-party applications. So if you have an external asset manager of some kind, we can integrate that asset manager with Hammerspace, have it set and remove metadata, which can activate or deactivate some of these data transfer or data instantiation policies.
And I think that's part of the magic of this whole solution, is that idea that a human can decide to kick off an orchestration job to a new location, or it can be done through an application where if you're not an IT person, but you're used to your tools that you're using for creative work, it can be done through the application as well. So machines or humans can kick off their orchestration jobs depending on how your workflow works.
Yes. Like, for example, we have an integration with Autodesk ShotGrid available out there on GitHub that allows you to, in the ShotGrid application, in the ShotGrid UI, you can tag objects And those tags can find their way as metadata onto the file system, causing data transfer, data instantiation behavior. So this kind of wraps it all up. You can have 3 wildly separated sites. And like I said, you can do anything from completely on-demand data population all the way up to completely policy-driven and any point in between. And a large file system can be exposed everywhere on all of the sites where Hammerspace is installed, but you don't necessarily have to pay the cost of transferring all of that data out of the gate.
Awesome. So I think we're going to go back to you, DJ, and talk a little bit about these multi-region workflows.
I think we'll talk, both Stefan and I are going to kind of jump in on this. I'll start quickly talking about the implications for AWS. And then I think, Stefan, you can talk a little bit more about the Flame side of things. So like we said in the first architectural diagram, we've got one challenge. We've got a Flame artist working on the East Coast and a Flame artist working on the West Coast. So we've kind of solved a portion of that problem by moving to Flame on AWS. And so we've got that infrastructure already put together. And I think this is where Stefan takes over to talk a little bit more about what's possible with Flame.
Yes, absolutely. So if we were to go to the next slide, so what we're going to do, in fact, to be able to share the content between the 2 sites here, because in the past and before this technology and before the cloud, in fact, while you had to prepare an archive, you had to manage download location, upload location, and ensure that the end user was getting the right content at the right time. And of course, when you have very heavy VFX projects and where schedule is always an issue, well, that can cause issues. So what we're going to do in this infrastructure is we're going to perform what we call a shot publish. So the idea is, after conforming the creative editorial structure, the timeline structure, using the native camera original footage, well, we're going to be able to build a folder structure and add the open clips, which is an XML representation of the media, to be able to be referencing not only the backplates, but also the results of the VFX artist. So let's go to the next slide. So what we're going to do, in fact, we're going to publish to this global file system. And for the various artists located around the world, well, it's going to be seen the same way as a local file system, and they will only have to go through their file browser. They'll be able to load the batch scene, which will reference not only, like I said, the backplate, but also will define the rendering location. So that means the moment they're going to be working on their shot and create a new version, well, automatically the Flame artist managing the timeline will get the updates. Next slide. Yeah, absolutely. So then the open clip versioning is not only working only for the first, but also for all the version that the VFX artists will do at their own facilities. Because as you would imagine, long form episodic content require very often a lot of studio, so they don't have to download the whole media for the whole shot. They only get the content they need for the work they have to provide. And
nothing beats a live demo, right?
Absolutely, because we felt that telling you about the technology is great, but at NEB, we were able to show it on the show floor, but a show floor is always a bit messy, right? So being able to be in a webinar allows us to share 2 screens, and I'm going to show you what I just show you 2 slides, which will be a bit more interesting, I'm sure. So at the bottom of the screen, what you see is Flame. So in this environment, what I have is content that has been conformed from editorial structure, could be an AF, an XML, and EDL, using the various camera format that our users are using for their production. So when everything has been ensuring that everything is at the right time, at the right place in the sequence, the media at its fullest resolution can then be sent, in fact, to VFX artists. And to do so, we're going to do what we call a shot publish workflow, which is kind of a super export, in fact, workflow. So you would, in fact, bring your content into the media export capability of Flame, and then you would use one of the various shot publish preset, which enables you to either deliver a root directory of DPX or OpenEXR. In this case, we provide OpenEXR, since it's a format which is used more and more in fishing VFX pipeline. And I'm not going to go through the publishing, aspect of it, but what's happening here is on the file system, all the content from the sequence has been published. So I have all the shots which have been prepared, and the V0, which is the backplate, which will be used by the VFX artist. And then when I go back to Flame after the publish process, well, I get what we call the underscore publish sequence, which contains the original footage on the bottom track, and then the publish on the top track, which is a reference to what I just published, but also a reference to what the VFX artist will create. And I will give you an example. So here on this backplate, I only have the backplate, right? So that's the original. But then I'm going to ask DJ working on another instance to create us a nice visual effects on that shot. And we're going to be able to see the flow and see the update of the content instantaneously.
And so, yeah, I'm going to take over. And if you take a look at the top left, so just again, to reiterate just what you're looking at, in the bottom right-hand corner is a flame that's running on the East Coast. And so Stéphane's connecting from Montreal on the East Coast into that flame and being able to use it. What I'm connecting to up here on the top left is actually on the West Coast. So this is a machine that's running on the West Coast with low latency for people, again, that are working from anywhere on the West Coast. I'm going to go ahead and just go load up. As part of that publish session, it created a batch setup for me already. So I can go through and browse to that folder and see my batch setups that are there. And I believe the one that you wanted me to take a look at was 22. So
let me have a look. So let me zoom in. So yes, shot 22 will be the one we want to have some work on it.
Okay. And so right now what we're looking at is this shot that you should see the same shot over there. If we go to the first frame, that's kind of what we're looking at. I've got a very simple setup to just do something with her eyes. So to be able to use the machine learning that's in Flame to be able to quickly select just her eyes. And I'm making them a little bit extra blue. So if we take a look here, you can see that they're extra blue. And if I zoom in on the eyes, again, they're karmically blue, but this is just for the demo to make it clear and to make it clear what's going on. And as Stéphane said, because it automatically was set up to render back to the right location, to update the version, even though I'm connecting to the Hammerspace cluster that's on the West Coast, as I go through and I generate this, so I'm going to go through and render this out, it's going to pull the frames that are needed for me to actually render from the East Coast so that I can actually have access to them in order to do this simple effect, and then generate new frames. And those frames will be generated on the West Coast because right now they're only needed on the West Coast. But like Mike said at the beginning, we did have one objective where we immediately updated the open clip file. So even though we're not transferring back those ZXRs immediately, we're updating the contents of the open clip file immediately. And so that means that Stéphane, within a matter of seconds, should be able to go back, and if he takes a look at his format options, be able to see, well, actually, go ahead and update it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am updating it right now. So what happens the moment that DJ created, in fact, the version, an outline has been added to the shot, which has been revision. So that means the end user knows that there's something happening to this shot. But of course, since we could have 1, 15, 25 artists, so they could be working in parallel on their content. And here I have a drop down that gives me the ability to move, in fact, to the newly created version that DJ just created here. So very easily, I can get the update of the work that DJ has done on my content. And as you can see, we see this is quite subtle on the screen, but you see the output of the work he has done. This is a non-destructive workflow, by the way, right? So we haven't overwritten any file on the file system. We only created something new, which is managed through the open clip, which manage all the versioning. So that means I can go back to my original plate, and I can go back and forth to version 1, version 2, and so on until producer and directors are happy with the work that has been done on the VFX side.
It sounded like, Stéphane, you thought that my effect was a little bit too subtle, so I should try do another revision. And
absolutely, we want to more love.
Make it a little bit more obvious, maybe?
Yes.
So let me bring up the gain as well, a little, just a smidge, and try to render this out now. Now, again, you can see it's rendering a lot faster because we've already got a cache of the source frames on the West Coast. And so it doesn't have to pull those frames over as it's rendering. It was able to do that immediately. And if we go back and we update on the other side on the East Coast, we should now be able to see something. Again, the reason why the frames are coming in slowly is we said don't copy everything over to the East Coast immediately. Only when Stéphane says, yeah, this is actually a version I want, will I go ahead and pull all of them back. So we can kind of scrub through and be able to see those updates pretty quickly.
Absolutely, and I feel that you gave yourself a lot in the shot. Thank you very much for this nice art. I can mark it as viewed, meaning that this shot for me now is the right one I want to work with. And like I said, I mean, you can easily go back and forth through all the versions, see the time it was been created, so that way you know that this shot is coming from a given artist at the given time. And in this demonstration, we're not talking about production management like shot grids and other products, but I mean, imagine that you could also implement these workflows to make a very strong capabilities for your VFX farming out of technologies.
So maybe it's worth jumping back to our presentation and just taking a look at what that looks like and what we actually just showed. So give me a second to pull that up. Let's jump back in. And just to kind of reiterate what we just showed during the demo, so on the East Coast, Stéphane was running down in the bottom right-hand corner a flame that had the full timeline, did a shot publish, and that shot publish generated out all of the source material, as Stéphane said, along with open clips. I was able to quickly browse through that shot publish folder structure. Like Mike said before, we've got all of the metadata, so we can see it immediately. We weren't transferring anything over. All of those, it's probably about 2 terabytes worth of material. We didn't transfer any of it. We just saw all of it right away, so I was able to browse through. I opened up the batch setup. As I opened it, it took, 2-3 seconds because it actually needed to pull the contents of that batch setup over to the West Coast to load up in Flame. I was able to do my work. I just looked at one frame, so it didn't even pull over the source material. When I rendered the first time, it took a little while, and the reason for that was it was pulling over the EXRs, the source EXRs as it needed them, but it updated the open clip immediately. And so that allowed Stéphane to see the version right away. Then we did it a second time, and it rendered a lot quicker because we already had a version of those source EXRs on the West Coast.
Wow. So, I remember when we were, in fact, talking with studios before the cloud, I mean, all the things they needed to do to provide the studios the right shot, do the pulls, ensuring that they had the right thing. But of course, sometimes they have more frame than they need, so they will do visual effects on content that might never see the screen, right? So, and of course, after that, well, they need to deliver you the content. Somebody has to do the conform, so they need to put it back in the sequence. But then think about when you have multi-version, multi-deliverables. I mean, all the films these days, they go in different media outlet, they go in different color spaces, different frame rates sometimes, depending on the deliverables. So if you have to do that manually, well, you're wasting time and money at the end of the day. So that technology enables you to easily provide, in fact, your visual effects studios around the world, and then get back their work without having to think about that. So that's up to me. When I've heard about the technology before, maybe when we were presenting, with you guys at the show, I was impressed to see that. So that's quite impressive, and that's going to save a lot of people, not only time, because sometimes, there's the money aspect of it and then the time, but sometimes you might have a lot of money, but don't have time. So if you can, bypass all the manual work and do the auto magic like we've seen, well, that's a very, very big improvement in workflows.
Yeah, and
I think it's amazing when you look at this. I think that when we were at NAB, but also just talking to customers in the space on a regular basis, there's the collaboration piece, because most of these organizations are global and they're looking at how do I staff talent. There's so much happening in this space, so many projects that studios want to take on, but they need to have more talent. And so the idea of how quickly you could bring on a new artist or a whole team of artists and have them working together no matter where they sit. It seems like this is really a game-changing workflow for the world we're living in right now.
Yes. Totally.
DJ, did you want to add something before I rudely overran you?
No, I actually, it was very similar comment is, one of the challenges we've got as an industry as a whole is we're all scaling across the globe, right? And so, the ability to be able to collaborate across multiple sites without having to worry about those details is a pretty significant improvement. Both syncing too little means that someone can't get their job done. Syncing too much means that all of a sudden you're over provisioning storage everywhere. It takes time to do that. And so the ability to say, hey, we're all able to see all of the work that was done and then just only sync on demand what's actually necessary really solves the problem in a very elegant way, I think.